Hi, everyone. Welcome to Morbidplanet. This is one of our new segments that we've started doing called A Virgin's View. I'm your host, Erin Chapman, and today my co-host is Sean Rourke from the YouTube channel A Vampire's Castle. So make sure to check out his channel. There's actually a link below, and if you like vampires, I think you will thoroughly enjoy what he has to offer. For those of you that don't know, A Virgin's View is a segment where I review a classic horror film without being exposed to any background information or any reviews, just basically nothing having to do with the film. So before we go ahead, just beware that there will be spoilers, obviously. So tonight's film, Sean picked, because again, he's going to be picking the films. I'm going to be looking at them because he's already seen them. So tonight we're looking at Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, which it looks like it was 1974, if I've got that right.
That's right. And I was delighted when you picked Captain Kronos because, you know, it's always a joy to go back and watch a Hammer vampire film. So, yeah.
Which is interesting because I think this is, I think, only the second Hammer film I've seen. Maybe
what was the previous one?
So I know there's, what was it? The Vampire Lovers? That was one,
yes.
Wasn't it? Okay.
Yes, that was the Carmilla one. Yeah.
And then I was trying to think, is Dracula, was it a vamp? Like,
yeah. So
was it a Hammer
almost all of the Christopher Lee Dracula movies were Hammer films. I think he did one. He did, well, actually, he did one. He played Dracula once in another movie.
Okay.
That is fairly well-ish known. And then he also, I come to find out, he also played Dracula in a bunch of kind of comedic-ish roles in other foreign language films. But yeah, no, he did, I think he did six movies with Hammer Films as Dracula. And that's like a whole story unto itself, like that whole thing. But
so yeah, that's why I thought it was different. And again, because I haven't seen a lot of them, which I'll go into after, there's like, you know, some things that I was like, oh, am I seeing a pattern, or is it just, you know, this movie and the last one? I don't know.
I can't wait.
So I'm gonna go into the movie. So I watched it. I got it off Apple TV. It's where I found it. I was disappointed after, though, because I paid for it, and then I found out apparently it was free on YouTube. So apparently I should look more. So
assumedly, if anybody here wants to watch Captain Kronos, they can just go to YouTube and watch it.
Yeah, and I even found it in a different article after I'd watched the film, because I was just looking for some fun facts, and they're like, watch the film here for free. And I was like, oh crap. Okay. So I will look better next time. So yeah, I guess to get into the film, so it was just like, there's these two chicks hanging out in the woods here. They were putting flowers, doing, you know, girly things, I guess, fixing their hair. And one of them is like, I'm gonna go get flowers and some other stuff to put in your hair. And she leaves her friend, wanders off. And then all of a sudden you see this mysterious stranger in black, and she's attacked, of course. And her friend comes back standing there all frozen, and she's like, what's going on? And she doesn't say anything. And then this guy just randomly goes by on his horse, and I guess it's Dr. Marcus, who sees how freaked out she is. So he goes over to help her, and he goes and looks at her friend, only to find out, dun dun dun, her face is just an old dead woman, and she's got a little bit of blood on her mouth. So that wasn't really what I expected, because, you know, I was like, oh, vampire film. I was expecting, oh, they attacked her, blood everywhere, and she's dead. So that was different. And then we cut to a fancy looking guy with the flowing blonde hair, urgently riding his horse with this hunchback following in hot pursuit. And they got a wagon full of crap. And I say fancy just because I saw his attire. I guess he had like this coat and stuff on. So I'm assuming he was in an army. I don't even know, but yeah, he just looked very fancy. And at one point, when you notice actually him like riding across the field, it almost looked like, because I guess the color of his pants, I'm like, he's wearing no pants. I don't know if you noticed that. It's just like this. It was like the 70s
color. You know, dudes didn't wear pants all the time.
Exactly. You know, you got 70s porn and stuff. So hey. So yeah, he goes across, and I guess we find out then these are our two heroes, which is Captain Kronos, I guess played by, I looked it up, Horst Janssen, if I say that right.
Yep.
And this one, Professor, I can't even say it, Grost, but they had a huge name. I don't know if you want to attempt to say his name. Hieronymus.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember what the character's first name was, but yeah, it was a guy named John Cater, I believe, who played.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Okay. So I guess then these guys are going along, they're in the woods, and then they found this gypsy named Carla who was strung up in a pillory. So I guess for you people that don't know, that's, you know, the old school thing where they got their head in, their arms hanging out, and they're locked in this wooden thing. And he gallantly just cuts her loose, and he's questioning and asks, "What did you do?" And she's like, "I danced on a Sunday." And right away I'm like, is this back in like Elmer City in Oklahoma from like Footloose? Because it was like banned back in like 1898. They were not ever allowed to dance. And I was like, maybe Kevin Bacon's gonna come out. So yeah, it was interesting that was the only thing she said was, no, I danced on a Sunday. And I was like, okay. So and then yeah, we then had a happy family celebrating a birthday, and she got this cool present. She went to go find her friend, and again she goes in the woods and she's attacked, and basically, you know, staggers home with her last breath, and then they can see same thing, she's an old lady and she's died again. So we're obviously seeing a pattern, and you know, that's 2 people dead now. And I guess Captain Kronos now and his little posse, because we've got Carla and we've got the professor, they went to this village. Was it Durward, I guess?
Something like
it was
that,
pronounced really weird. And then when I looked how it was spelt, I didn't think it sounded the same. But anyway, to meet Dr. Marcus, who we saw earlier in the scene, because he put out an SOS for help and said there was a problem going on and, you know, people were getting attacked. And right away, the professor grossed, it's vampires. And this was the cool part that I really liked, was he right away then went and started talking about how there's so many different species, and some suck blood, some suck youth with a kiss. And then how he was like suspecting hypnosis as well. And I guess I'm assuming he's supposed to be like a Van Helsing with like maybe a touch of Igor, because they threw in the hunchback thing, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if their other films do this or not, but I thought that was really interesting that it wasn't just your standard attack on the neck, kill them, but it's like, oh, we're just gonna, you know, suck the beauty out of everyone. And then the next thing, it actually made me laugh a lot, was I guess the scene where Kronos was washing up, and then he asked Carla if she's gonna move on. And she's like, no, I'm going to stay here if you'll have me. And he's like, oh yeah, I'll have you. I was just like, all right, 70s porn here. It was just hilarious. And then they just kind of smiled back and forth at each other. And then obviously they were going to go off and do it. So yeah, that was kind of humorous, I thought. And I don't know, because the last Virgin's View I didn't know it was a comedy at the time, but I don't think this was a comedy. Is this supposed to be just like a horror?
Yeah, I think that this was a little different for Hammer film. This, as far as I know, I mean, there's so many Hammer films that like,
yeah,
I've only seen the vampire ones for the most part, but there's always been like a little bit of humor peppered in here and there, but usually it's like if you go back to like the late 50s and the 60s, it's the sort of the mode of the time was you have everybody be serious, and then there's one character who comes in and is just goofy, and like that's the funny person that then you laugh at. But then after a decade or two of that, when you reach the 70s, you've got especially the late 60s going into the 70s, you have this transition where you've had all of these auteur artistic filmmakers who have advanced the storytelling, the visual storytelling over the course of several years. And also you've got, this is right as we're getting to sort of the rise of the blockbuster film. So like Star Wars came out this a couple of years later actually, but like this is right around the point where Jaws is coming
Oh,
up.
okay.
And so you go from like, haha, here's the goofy comic relief character, to just sort of a more mature way of adding in comedic elements, in terms of there isn't one character who says all the jokes,
Like little
but there are,
quips kind of thing here and there. Yeah.
exactly, so
Okay.
there will just be like funny little moments with the very serious characters, just so that the audience gets a chance to laugh, and
Okay.
that tends to make an audience enjoy a popcorn film more, and then spread word of mouth to their friends to go to the theater and see it. So
Yeah, then we go to a lady. This time she's attacked now in a church, which of course then right away I'm like, okay, well, this is a little different, because we know vampires don't go in churches. We've got our classic vampire tropes. And the part that I really liked then was next. So Professor went and planted a bunch of dead toads in the hole, which of course made me think of the British food, toad in a hole, sausage, and Yorkshire pudding,
well,
which
I've never
is,
heard of that before.
oh my God, if
Okay.
you have to try it, it's amazing. You've had Yorkshire,
Do I?
you've had Yorkshire pudding, right? Have you ever had that?
I don't think so.
No. Oh my
I've never
God.
been to the UK before.
Okay.
And
Well, it's funny because I grew up and my parents used to even make it. Like, so it made me laugh that he had toads in the hole. But then I loved the fact that it was different vampires, I guess, just rules that he was explaining. He's like, yeah, we're planning these because if a vampire crosses the dead toad, it comes back to life. And I was like, wow, okay. So again, something I hadn't heard of. So I liked that they had thrown that in there. And plus the other weird part is you start noticing is this vampire is attacking during the day as well. So it's not like a creepy night looking film. All of it seems to be so far during the day. So yeah, then we have Dr. Marcus, and Kronos is sitting there without his shirt on, and he's looking at his scars, and he was just like touching them, and he's like, I know you have real guts. I've seen them, because he was a surgeon and he like stitched them up before. So again, little funny one-liners that they're sticking in there. And yeah, and then next thing we know, we're back in the barn. Carla strips, Kronos, so they get it on. Well, I guess Dr. Marcus and the professor are playing chess and getting smashed inside. So that's okay. And then we get another lady who's attacked in the woods. Kronos digs up the toads and it proves it was a vampire. So they kind of do a whole, I say, Scooby-Doo thing, where it's like the gang splits up and they start to search for the vampire or the undead. And we cut then to a local tavern, which totally looked like, old school British tavern. But we had some horrors and we had some very creepy, abusive male villagers. And a lady drinking with a blindfold, which I still don't get. And I was going to ask you, do you remember that?
Yeah.
What was
that
with
stood
that?
out to me too. I was like,
why?
I don't remember this subplot. And then, yeah, you never see her again after that.
And that's why I was like, did I miss something later? But okay, I feel better, because I'm like, this has to be relevant, because she's got, she's blind or got a blindfold on. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can talk about that after. But
okay.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Marcus then goes through the woods and he ends up at Lady Durward's grand mansion, which I'm going to assume they've got to be the rich people in town, because it sounds like the village is named after them. So I'm going to go with that. And she apparently has a beef with Dr. Marcus because her husband died with the plague like 7 years ago to that day, which is another interesting coincidence. And she blames him for the death. But we then go and like have, I guess she's got a son and a daughter. So Paul and I think it was Sarah. And it was just so weird that right away he comes in, starts talking to Paul. And then what do you see on like the table there was a book of like witchcraft and necromancy. And it's like, that's just like too good to be like sitting there. It's like,
absolutely.
Oh. And
we got some horror buzzwords going on here.
And then his sister shows up. And the one thing that I thought again was weird with this, because all the other women in this film are obviously scantily dressed, their boobs are popping out the top, very well endowed. And then she comes in and she's got, the pixie cut. She's got pants, which no other woman was wearing. And, she had like, male attire on. So that kind of stood out to me. And they were both really sketched out by, I guess, the doctor's visit, even though, he's like, oh, I'm just here, just saying hi. It's okay. And then we go back to the trashy pub, and I guess Kronos and the professor had found it, got in there, and the nice villagers decided to pick on the professor because he has a hunchback. And it was really cool was he just did these fancy moves, and the next thing you know, poof, it's like Kronos slaughtered all three of them with one sword swipe, which was pretty impressive. And yeah, then we go back and we've got Dr. Marcus, and he finds the vampire in the woods, it looks like, and it was kind of really cheesy because at first I didn't know, was there a glitch because the lighting went weird, and then the brook stopped flowing, it was like a freeze frame, and then the trees stopped. So I was like, I think they're just trying to like indicate something, but I was like, I don't know if there was a glitch or not. The professor was kind of sulking because I guess he was upset because they made fun of him. But then Kronos came back and he's like, no, this was clearly, you know, on purpose. Someone was paid to pick a fight with us. It's okay, you know. And it was nice because it shows that, you know, they had such a close relationship. They obviously cared about each other. They were buds. And they go back out to the forest again, always in the forest. And they're looking this time with, I guess, bells, because they wanted to like string up bells to see if they could catch any movement. And then Marcus is kind of acting all sketchy. And then we cut back and we see Sarah, who's returning to her mansion wearing a black cloak. So it's like, was she the creepy, mysterious person? Don't know, because we start thinking about it. Then we hear a little bit of a backstory for Kronos, and it sounds like he went off to fight in a war, came back, and his sister and his mother were vampires, and they tried to bite him, and he stabbed them to death. But then it was weird because in the same scene, he was hanging out with Carla, and I guess she was like, oh, you were really rough with me, because they'd just done it. And she had this bit of blood there, and then he like licks the blood from her face. So it's like, okay, what's going on with you there? Do you got some vampire tendencies? We don't really know. And then Marcus freaks out because he noticed while he was shaving that he looks younger. And then basically they're like, crap, he's a vampire. He gets punched out in the face. They tie him up. He has to be killed. And this is again where we've got some classic tropes coming in again, where it was like they tried to stake him, which was a fail. And it was a very fancy looking stake. It looks like a banister. It reminded me of like, you know, all carved. They tried to hang him. That was a fail. That didn't work. They tried to burn him. It was just like they tried everything. And then it's like almost by accident, he'd gotten stabbed by his own cross, I guess. And yeah, so they're like, okay, we know what to do now. We know how to kill this thing. And so then they decide to, I guess, go to this cemetery, and they stole this giant ass cross, which like was bigger than them. And I didn't know at first or understand what they were doing. And then I realized they were melting down the metal to make a sword, because then it could kill the vampires. And I was like, yes, okay, that's good. And he did some weird meditation thing, which we can talk about, but he had a cloth on his face. And now I don't know if this goes back to like shroud eaters and other things like this, or if he's just being kinky and weird.
What?
I don't know. He was like,
all right.
It was weird. So he had like the shroud on him, and then he had like his hands like this, and he was meditating the whole time while they were making the sword. So I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And then when the sword was done, all of a sudden he rips it off and he's like, hey. So I don't know, I'm confused. And this leads then, you know, we're getting to the end, and we've got they're looking again to go out to the mansion, obviously, and see, because they think that's where the vampire is. And the lightning strikes, you see a carriage going, and this was the cool part I liked, was it like ran over this just random dude and it like ripped his arm right off. And I was just like, that was a good effect, especially because the 70s. And so when Kronos came along, he like sees the guy and he picks up like the arm, and it's like, no, that was pretty good. I thought that was good anyway. And yeah, like it's just weird that they get over there and they get to the house, and I guess they at least had thought about this because Carla was gonna help them. So she, you know, went to the door and pretended, oh, I'm helpless, I'm lost, please take me in, as bait. And before Kronos, I guess, had prepped for battle, it was funny because he'd like had painted crosses all over his body. And then he had these weird, I guess, garlic, but it was the flowers. So he'd like put them up here, and he looked I don't know. He looked very feminine. But anyway, I know why he put them there.
Quite fancy.
Yes, he looked very fancy, actually. And then they were smart enough, and they threw a little mirror on his sword as well. So he was prepared with that, I guess, as like his secret weapon. And yeah, they get over to the house. She gets let in just like planned. They're acting all weird again, but I think maybe the brother and sister just are weird. I'm not sure. The one thing that we can talk about after is I thought the brother really looked like Evan Peters. Do you ever watch American Horror Story?
I should say yes, but no.
Okay. But anyway, he's been almost in every season. And I was like, he could be like totally related, which I'll have to show you a picture because it was really very close. And then yeah, she goes and lies down, and we know that something's gonna happen, and someone's obviously going to sneak into the room because, you know, she's got bait. She's sitting there. We know there's a vampire in the house. And I was kind of suspecting, but I wasn't quite sure. And then you see that it was the mother who came in. And I was like, okay, yeah, explains it. You know, she didn't get out of the carriage at the cemetery and all this stuff. And I guess, though, the little twist that I didn't expect was her husband was actually alive. He didn't die. So anyway, Carla was meant to be for her husband as a snack. And then we have a whole bunch of, between Kronos and I guess her husband, a whole bunch of swashbuckling goes on, which makes me think right away it was like Errol Flynn style. It's like, you know, going back to like Robin Hood from 1938, or I don't know if you've seen these, or Captain Blood from 35. And I've seen all those movies. And I was like, this is definitely, and then I was like, maybe this is what I liked about the character, was because he totally reminds me of Errol Flynn when you start thinking about the way he's acting and his little quips, his saucy attitude, you know. And Errol Flynn back in the day, for if people haven't seen his films, he was very charismatic. And that's why he always had so many where it was like, he was the badass, he got the girl, you know, everything happened. So yeah, anyway, and the husband gets stabbed, killed by the sword, turns old, gushes out from his neck. And that was really cool too, because again, I think of effects for back in the day and what they could do with it. I really liked that scene. And then stabs her, you know, so she dies. And they just do the instantly, like in Dracula, where they just age and turn to bones, and it's just all blood and just not much there. But again, this made me think of like the other one, like we've talked about Dracula before, where it's like the climax comes like right at the end, and then the movie's just done. It's like there's no little, you know, tie up or anything. And I don't know if I kind of like that. I like that if there's a little bit after, but it was pretty much like, she's dead, everything's good, and we're going to wrap it up. And then basically he was like, okay, you know what? Carla, it's been fun. We got to go. We're going to take the horses. We got other stuff. We got other people to save. We got to save the world. And she's like, okay, you know. And then it was done. And then that was it. And they ride off just as fast as they rode in the first scene. It was just like they take off. So anyway, that was my long-winded interpretation.
That was a really good blow by blow of Captain Kronos. But so what did you think? What are your opinions?
I would say I liked it in the sense that, again, it reminded me of like Errol Flynn. We've got some, you know, swashbuckling going on. We've got him as the guy who comes in, he's saving everyone. And I liked the fact that the vampire element was there, but it was different. And that's what I think I liked the most, because it wasn't just your standard, you know, Dracula swoops in, bites their neck, turns them into a vampire. This was like, no, this was totally different. We're just sucking out their, you know, their youth. And it was like dead instantly. And then it's like, okay. And I'd say they probably killed like 5 or 6 people throughout the film. And I liked also that it was, you know, daylight. They went in the church. They like tried to kill them the standard way and nothing really worked. And then they had to kind of like be innovative. So yeah, I enjoyed that part. And it's just also like how they kind of changed the lore a bit, you know, with the toads and with other things. So yeah, I liked it that it just wasn't very standard, and it wasn't, to me, like your usual vampire thing.
Right.
The one thing that I thought was interesting that I looked after, though, was I guess this was supposed to be like part of, was it like a series? from what I understand.
Yeah, yeah. So the and I mean, if I'm talking too much here, let me know. But
No, that's okay.
yeah. So from what what I have gathered from various articles that I've read, and just and YouTube videos that I've watched, which, by the way, right before we started doing this, as I was quickly eating a sandwich, I was watching a YouTube video from the YouTube channel Dark Corners.
Okay.
And it's this guy who does these excellent breakdowns of especially like older horror films. And he's got a whole series on the Hammer films. And it's just incredibly insightful stuff. But so one of the things that so that's where I'm getting a lot of this from. But
yeah,
so at the time period that this happened, or that this movie came out, Hammer Films had been making movies for almost 2 decades.
Oh,
and
okay.
They had, as a studio, they had made a lot of money off of their Dracula films, from the 50s all the way up through, I think the final one that they released with Christopher Lee was like 2 years before this movie came out.
Oh.
And the thing was that like the fans loved Christopher Lee as Dracula, and Christopher Lee progressively hated more and more with every movie the script.
Oh,
okay. And so he was getting more and more expensive to have in the movies, and he was basically refusing to do more than just like a couple of scenes, because he's like, this is garbage. This is nothing like
this.
Yeah, because he was a purist about Stoker's novel. And so he was always like, where is all of the great writing from Stoker's novel in any of these Dracula movies? And so like he would fight to get lines into the films. So anyway, after a certain point, he was like, his final film was The Satanic Rites of Dracula. And he was like, no more, that's it, I'm done, you will never get me back, I'm not playing Dracula again, I'm gonna go live my life, good luck,
live free.
Yeah. And so Hammer Films was like, we can't, like, they had almost a couple of times tried to recast Dracula, and they always got cold feet and just paid the money to get Christopher Lee back.
Okay.
But so they had just reached the point where they were like, well, damn, what are we going to do about vampire movies now?
Yeah.
And so they started making, they went and made the Vampire Lovers, because they were like, oh, Carmilla, that's a whole other literary vampire that is in the public domain, and we can mine it for movies. And that was about the time that they were really pushing the boundaries with the censors, being able to have nudity and a lot more, red flowing blood on camera, obviously dudes' arms getting torn off by carriage accidents.
Yeah.
So they were going sort of that a slightly more exploitation route with the Carmilla movies, but they really wanted to start a new franchise. And so that's what Captain Kronos was supposed to be. And this was the first movie in what was going to be a whole series. And that is what I suspect the blind woman in the tavern that's only in there for like the 2 scenes.
Yeah.
I expect that she was a plant for a later film. So like she might have been the vampire in movie 2, or someone who comes to his aid in movie 2, or something like that. And then they could always go back and point and say, oh yeah, no, she was
tied into the first one. Yeah,
exactly, she had been watching him. That's my guess. I don't actually know that, but that's just what I'm assuming, because that's the type of thing as a movie maker you want, especially if you want it to be a whole long series, you want to start planting those seeds in the beginning, so that you have payoff later. So anyway, so that's what this was supposed to be. But the problem was that and this is out of Gordon Melton's book, where he said that it just didn't do well at the box office. Like it seriously underperformed.
Mhm.
And then when I was watching the Dark Corners video just now, the guy went on to say that, like, not only did it not perform well,
Yeah.
when the head of Hammer Studios watched the finished movie, he hated it and was like, I don't like this. And like they sat on it for like 2 years before they released it. And there
Oh,
was like no advertising for it. Like he basically wanted to torpedo the film because he didn't like it at all,
the
which is
poster was
unfortunate.
cheesy. Did you see the poster?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like just everything, like everything kind of conspired against this film, which
It was like
sucks because,
half-assed. It was just so just like, here, you know, and I saw that and I was just like, what? This is
yeah,
like, you know, like, because I've seen so many really good vampire posters over the years where it's like, I would watch that, but this was just like,
it's like,
no.
ugh.
Yeah.
And like I've you know, I've seen this movie a couple times. I've really enjoyed it. Like I was impressed with it the first time I saw it. I was like, oh man, it's too bad they never made more of these. Come to find out that the guy who plays Captain Kronos, Horst Jansen,
Yeah.
uh they redubbed all of his lines with a different actor.
What?
Like I didn't know that until literally 20 minutes ago. I'm like, what?
Oh my
But
God. I didn't know that
yeah,
either. Okay.
evidently Horst is I think he's German
Yeah.
and probably had a little bit of an accent.
And they didn't like it.
And it's either, I mean, so the studio boss might have been like, you know, he's supposed to be playing an Englishman, let's redub him with English dialogue, or I just hate that really good looking blonde dude and I want to screw him over, so I'm going to have one of my friends redo all of his dialogue. I don't know what the case was, but yeah, so like so unfortunately not a bad film. And you know, like you were saying, it introduces like a lot of cool stuff, like the whole
Yeah.
burying toads in boxes as a part of the scientific method, but using supernatural stuff to figure out, well, what direction does the vampire enter this forest?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then the whole idea of not all vampires are the same
And
is,
he was so well versed, like just right away, he's just spouts off, you know, like, and that's why I was like,
yeah,
oh, you're like the Van Helsing here. And he's just like, you
yeah,
know, they're not all the same. There's this type, I've seen this. And it's like, so you get right away, he's like, you're the expert, obviously, because you know everything.
yeah,
And then it's like they just start incorporating different things. And like I loved it when they did the bells too. So it's like they
yeah,
got the huge thing
yeah,
of the bells, they strung out like this huge area, and then they just sat in the tree and waited to like
yeah,
hear if there was movement or something.
yeah. And like you were saying with the whole like trying to figure out how do we kill this vampire, and
Mm-hmm.
we've got our captured vampire here, and we just start doing all this horrific stuff to him to try and figure out what works, until we accidentally come across like, oh, steel.
Yeah.
Steel is what kills these guys. And like that's, to my knowledge, that's the first time that has ever been used. Not steel,
Oh, okay.
but
Yeah,
well,
the
actually
concept that they were doing.
possibly steel. But yeah, but the idea that not all vampires are the same,
Mm-hmm.
and that there are lots of variations of them out there, and you have to figure out what one are we dealing with. Like
Yeah.
that's really cool. And by the way, a great setup for a series of movies, because then
Mm-hmm.
you as the audience know when they get to the second movie, they can't just, you know, bury frogs and hope that they're going to find out who this new vampire is. Like
And then we'd
it's
hopefully see some different ones as well out of their little
exactly,
toolbox. Yeah.
exactly.
And I guess like with the different films, and again, because I haven't seen a lot of these Hammer films, it was just like, so the swashbuckling aspect, the whole, you know, Errol Flynn and everything. Is this common in all the other ones? Do they do a lot of sword
No,
fighting? No? Okay, so
no.
this was again.
Yeah, this was, and so this movie is it's really interesting just from like an out like a more sort of God's eye view of just like cinema influence in general,
Mm-hmm.
because this not only was, you know, about, this was following a new main character who was a vampire hunter who was the hero,
Yeah.
and that was something that the previous Hammer films, the vampire movies, were always following the vampire. And like there was always
Okay.
a group of heroes, of good guys who slay the vampire at the end, but they were completely interchangeable throughout all the movies, with the exception of Peter Cushing playing Van Helsing. But even that got a little wacky in there. So clearly the guy who directed this movie, who I understand this was his first movie and his last movie that he directed. Otherwise, he was a regular screenwriter for Hammer.
Okay.
But he clearly was being influenced by the movies from the previous decade that he was enjoying. And so you've got a lot of aspects of the spaghetti westerns in there.
Yes.
Where you've got, I mean, that whole scene in the tavern is straight up Sergio Leone, like, you know, sort of gunfight in the Wild West town where everybody's just standing there and
they stare them down
for somebody. Yeah, you're waiting for somebody to twitch. And then suddenly the fight is over like that. And so like that's a very spaghetti western thing. And like all the Clint Eastwood style cigarettes that are super long that everybody's smoking.
Yeah, and he had those throughout the movie. It was like these little cigars, but not quite. They looked like really thin.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like halfway between a smoke and a cigar. But yeah,
right.
he had those a few scenes that he was like puffing on those.
Exactly. And that's not exactly something that you associate with you know, Victorian or Edwardian England. So but there's also the influence, obviously, in some rather, you know, visual ways, but also some subtle ways of the Japanese samurai films at the time, that, you know, of which Kurosawa was the master of, in the fact that
yes, he had two types of swords, didn't he?
Exactly.
Yes,
one of which was a samurai sword. So clearly, you know, that's taking inspiration from the samurai films. And also there's an element to the samurai films in this that the samurai films took from the older westerns. So it's just this, you know, circular, you know, inspirational loop.
It's just a mishmash of like everything.
Yeah, everything kind of informs what comes after it. But the idea of a hero, a badass killer who rights wrongs, traveling from town to town to town, is a very samurai movie concept that then was cribbed for the spaghetti westerns, and, you know, happens in all the westerns, and then like goes all the way up to, you know, the 1970s and 80s version of the Hulk, all the way up to like Supernatural these days. If you want, it's like the heroes come into a new town and there's a problem and they have to deal with it.
And then they move on.
And then they move on afterwards. Yeah. And I mean, Supernatural is practically a Captain Kronos television show, because it's like
I enjoyed that show. I really did, I have to say.
Yeah, totally.
And it was filmed here.
Right.
The whole thing. It was all filmed
along
here.
with everything else that gets shot up in Vancouver. But yeah, so like, I mean, Supernatural is practically a Captain Kronos television show, because it's and it's because it is.
And they get the girl too, just
exactly.
Like, you know, usually it's Dean, but you know, they get the girl.
Works.
Yeah.
Right. It's usually Dean, because of course it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was a lot of there were a lot of new influences in Captain Kronos. And I mean, like I hadn't thought about it before, but what you said about the swashbuckling aspect of it, you know, hearkening back to the Errol Flynn movies, absolutely. And that's nothing that you saw in any of the Dracula films that Hammer did, or any of the Carmilla films that they did. Like that is specifically, and evidently also something I didn't know until a half hour ago, was that the actor Horst Jansen was an accomplished swordsman. So clearly he was cast
for his skills
in mind, for there to be a big sword fight at the end. And the dude who plays the Lord at
Yeah.
the end, who is the vampire who is almost fully healed, is a professional swordsman or like a fencing champion or something like that. And so the two of them could just like do this whole amazing sword fight, and it's a good sword fight.
It was, and that's why I said at first, it's like right away I went back to, because I watched a lot of the Errol Flynn ones when I was a kid. That's what was watched in our house, and then we've got all the westerns like, you know, John Wayne, and like, so I've seen a lot of old movies like that, but I was just like, this is just like Captain Blood. Oh my God, he's good at this. He was a good swordsman. So yeah, I enjoyed that, and it was just, and you got that sense too when he was in the graveyard where the lynch mob came, because they're like, this dude, he's new in town, he killed Dr. Marcus, and they're like,
Yeah,
we're gonna go get
exactly.
him. And so yeah, when they're like pillaging their cemetery and stealing the giant cross, they like, you know, and I think I counted, I think he like wiped out like 7 of them within like, you know, a minute. It's just like boom, 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 they're all dead, they're all down.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite good though. So you get little glimpses of his sword abilities, his swashbuckling abilities, and then at the very end of the movie, then it's like, okay, full on, this is our big final scene, this is, here we go. The same thing like in the pub, it was like, and then it's like, oh, they all fall over and all 3 of them are dead. And I'm like, at first I was like, where did he even get them? I'm not sure, but and then the last guy who's like doing the and then he like fell over on like the floor, but yeah, and then his like little pouch slid, so they're like, oh, that's why they were paid. So yeah, but I did enjoy the sword aspect though.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's like you really you hit it right there. Is like one of the, this film is different than like the Hammer films that came before. So like you're definitely not imagining that, and I hadn't actually realized that per se until you said that just now. But yeah, it's clearly, it was clearly an attempt at, you know, let's elevate what we've been doing before and introduce all these other elements that work really well in other films. And you know,
but then
now
it's interesting because though it didn't do well, so do you know what I mean? It's weird that they went this way, they did it, this one time comes in, he like directs it, he does this film which just watch, but it's like it just didn't cut it, because I guess you said the owner of the studio didn't like it. It looked like it didn't get really promoted very well because he had shitty posters. and and again, it's like one of those things where I guess with fans, it's like you go and do something different and fans will either embrace it or they're like, no, this is not what a Hammer film should be, I am not enjoying this. And again, because I haven't seen enough of them to say that, but I think that's where you can kind of like misstep with fans with certain things, is that could have been what happened here, and then it sunk it was just like, no.
Yeah, it would be interesting to be able to go back in time and actually be around when this movie came out and like talk to the people who were Hammer fans who watched it. When a studio decides they want to torpedo their own movie, and sometimes it's because they need to create a tax shelter for the year, and sometimes it's because it's for a personal vendetta between executives. Sometimes it's just a marketing department that just biffs it. And so I mean, there are all kinds of different reasons why something like that can happen, but like there have been some fantastic movies over history that did exceptionally bad at the box office because of that, and have only found a cult following afterward. And I mean, you know, most recently John Carter was one of those films that was just completely sabotaged by its own marketing push. And I mean, the Iron Giant, like nobody even knew that movie came out. It was an amazing, wonderful.
I haven't even heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's an animated film, and it's amazing. A very early Vin Diesel voice performance. And Highlander was like that.
I've seen that. I've seen the original when I was a kid. Yeah.
didn't do very well in the theaters, but man, it got a following. Would you say you enjoyed this movie or didn't?
But I give it, I would say about a 4 out of a 5. Like, it would have to be, for it a bit higher, it would have had to entertain me a little bit more. But I liked again, a little bit of the lore. I liked a bit of the gore that we had going on, which again, back then, it's just when I see certain scenes like that, I'm like, good for them. They did it this way because, it's not like now where everything is CGI.
Right.
So I liked things like that. And again, I just thought this was different. So I think what got me was a little bit of the cheesiness with, like I said, his character and Carla and a few other little one-liners and stuff, but it made it a little entertaining. So there's obviously elements I really liked, and then there's a few things where I was like, it's okay. So yeah, that's why I say I give it a 4. I give it a 4 out of 5, but I didn't hate it, which was good.
That's great. No, 4 out of 5. That's a real solid score.
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that.
And again, it was just, I would like to watch at some point, I think, another Hammer film, because I don't know, what was it? Is it, maybe that's a Dracula. Is it, what was it called? Dracula? Is it like 1972 or something, or 17?
Yeah.
Is it 1972?
Yeah, Dracula AD 1972.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't seen that one either.
Oh, okay. Then I won't say anything.
Yeah. Because I know, like, when I was reading a little bit of stuff about this, it would just like mention like, oh, this film, but it didn't say anything about the film. And I was like, oh, I haven't seen that one. And the only other thing I associate with the Hammer films was, when did they close? So they closed, right? At some point?
They did. So they finally went bankrupt, and they had been, if I remember correctly, they'd been doing this thing where they were sort of in the red all the time, and they were greenlighting movies based on money that they had not yet gotten back from the movie they were about to release. Okay. So it was sort of like this debt juggling act that they kept doing. And so the movie that finally sank them was actually a Dracula movie, or I should say a vampire movie. Yeah. And it had Peter Cushing returning to the role of Van Helsing, but they decided to do a joint film with the Shaw Brothers, who were a Hong Kong studio that was doing all the big kung fu movies back in the 70s. Oh, and okay. That was also another, like, they were extremely popular back in the 70s.
Oh, I've seen a bunch of those.
Sure. So Hammer Films was like, oh, this is great. We'll do a mashup of like the stiff upper lip British vampire hunters joining with a group of Hong Kong kung fu fighters against kung fu vampires.
That's just so weird. Okay.
And it was called The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, and has Dracula in it, but not played by Christopher Lee, because they approached him. They were like, one more, and he was like, hell no.
It's like, forget it.
So, and it proved to be their undoing, because they spent all this money on this, and it's a fun movie. Like, it's huge. They spent all this money on it, and it underperformed at the box office, and it just sent them into bankruptcy, and that was pretty much it. Excellent. Can people who are watching this, can they suggest movies?
Yeah, feel free to comment below if there's something that you guys want me to review, and if we could even find something that you haven't seen, that would be fun. But I don't know what we could find that you haven't seen.
Oh, there's actually a lot of vampire movies that I haven't seen, and especially a lot of vampire movies over the last 20 years. Because there's been like Gordon says, it's like there have been more vampire movies made in the last 10 years than there were in all of time.
Thank you, everyone from home, for tuning in today, and hopefully you enjoyed our little chat going back and forth here, and you will be motivated to go and watch the film now. If not, if you have seen the film, comment below as well and tell us what you thought of it. And also make sure to check out Sean's channel as well, which we have a link that we're going to put below here, and it's the Vampire's Castle.
So the Vampire's Castle, which you can look it up on YouTube, or you can just go to thevampirescastle.com. and there's a direct link to the YouTube channel there. And it's a channel that is entirely about vampire creativity and creativity in the vampire genre. So it's interviews with, you know, some people who are you know, huge novelists who have influenced the genre, but it's also a lot of videos that are meant to kind of help people who are writing their own vampire stories, to help give them ideas and just sort of tell them like some stuff that's been done before and why it worked or maybe didn't. So so there's a whole bunch of resources out there for any budding vampire novelists or filmmakers or just creators in general. And that's kind of what it's all about.
Thanks again for today. It's been great. And everyone, make sure to tune in next week, see what we have coming up. We've got some really cool interviews. And otherwise, have a good night, stay safe, and stay morbid. Bye for now.